Hello. Thursday evening and Friday will be BaOmer, the 33rd day of the Omer, one of the small and perhaps inconsequential moments in the Jewish calendar, but it's something which has become a really big festival and celebration, particularly in Israel. Hundreds of thousands of people make a pilgrimage to Meron in the Galil, to the tomb of Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai, one of the Tanoim, the sages of the Mishnah. It's a strange practice. There are bonfires, dancing, chalukas, haircuts. And of course, BaOmer is actually a day on which it's permitted to have weddings and haircuts. More of that in a moment. It's unusual. In an unusual year, BaOmer always falls on the same day of the week as Purim. So this year it's on a Friday. And that means that while in Israel Friday weddings have become more common because of the structure of the work week, Friday weddings are extremely rare outside of Israel, but they do tend to happen when BaOmer falls on a Friday. Now BaOmer, of course, is the 33rd day of the 49-day Omer period, counted from the second day of Pesach until Erev Shavuos. But there's no hint of mourning that needs to be suspended for haircuts and weddings in the Torah at all. The Torah says you should count 49 days, 7 weeks, from the day on which the Omer offering was brought on the second day of Pesach. And in fact, it seems that in early times the Omer period was one of celebration, but it later took on a kind of semi-mourning characteristic. The standard explanation for this is based in a Gemara in Yevamot, Samach Beis, Omid Beis, which talks about the 24,000 students of Rebbe Akiva who were understood to have died at a single time of the year, identified as the Omer period, and at some point they stopped dying. Apparently on BaOmer, although there is no trace of that at all in the original source. A more likely explanation, which has then been back read into the Gemara, is that this became a sad period for European Jews because of the Crusades, which took place at this time of the year, from the time of Rashi, from the late 11th century onwards. Now, BaOmer, as we've said, marks the end of the mourning period of mourning, or it might not. There are two distinct practices about these semi-mourning observances. Many communities, Eastern European Jews, Sfaradim, start at the beginning and they end on BaOmer. Western European Ashkenazim tend to begin the restrictions only at Rosh Chodesh Iyar after the month of Nisan has finished, continuing them till close before Shavuos and just have a day off in BaOmer. But actually, many sources say that the 34th day of the Omer, BaOmer, a day of which we've never heard, was the day on which all these tragedies ended, and which means BaOmer is not a significant day at all. Be as it may, it's become a day of celebration, a day when the mourning restrictions either end or are lifted temporarily, a day for haircuts and weddings. But what about this pilgrimage to Meron? What about the bonfires? What about the tomb of Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai? Well, until the 17th century, these practices were completely unknown. Celebrations were unknown on BaOmer. It was a day when you could have a haircut. It was a day when there could be a wedding. It was a day when there was no tachanun, but it wasn't celebrated in any known way. But after the Ari, Rabbi Yitzchak Luria, the great mystic of 16th century Sfat, certain ideas began to circulate, which associated BaOmer with Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai and the Zohar. The Zohar is the classic of Jewish mysticism. It came to light in the late 13th century. Exactly when the ideas emerged is a subject of hot debate and has been for centuries, whether it's an authentic text from the 2nd century from Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai himself, to whom it's attributed, or whether it's a set of developing ideas. Be as it may, Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai is intimately associated with the Zohar and the mystical tradition, the light, as it were, of the Torah, hence the bonfires. It's quite a flimsy connection, bringing the light, the fire of Torah into the world. Now, Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai was perhaps the most prominent disciple of Rabbi Akiva, and we will recall that it was Rabbi Akiva's students who died during this period, which means that Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai's life and death are somehow emblematically connected with this time of the year. There's a passage in the Talmud which explains that Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai and his son dwelt in a cave for many years, and they received a mystical revelation, which has then later been identified with the Zohar. Now, his death on Lag BaOmer comes from the writings of Rabbi Chaim Vital, the primary student of the Ari of Rabbi Yitzchak Luria, in a book called Pri Eitz Chaim. And it refers to the celebration on Lag BaOmer v'hatam, and the reason Shemeis Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai b'Lag BaOmer, because Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai died on Lag BaOmer. However, unfortunately, this has been recognised as a printing error, and the word Shemeis should really be Simchas, not that he died, but a day of celebration because of the association of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai and the mystical tradition. So as such, there's probably no genuine connection between the death of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai and Lag BaOmer, but these ideas have gradually become so much part of the culture, certainly of those Jews who are interested in the mystical tradition from the Hasidic and Sephardi tradition, that it's hard to separate them or persuade people that this probably is something which is of much later origin and maybe not authentic at all. One other thought about Lag BaOmer, which is that Lag BaOmer marks the beginning of the final third of the Omer period. And according to the Shem Shmuel of Sokachov, a book of which I'm particularly fond, writing in early 20th century Poland, when we reach the final third of a long period, then we begin to look forward rather than backward. And so the Shem Shmuel offers a more rationalist approach to this, which is that from the 33rd day of the Omer, we begin to look towards Shavuos. We're no longer rooted in the kind of tragedies of the early part of the Omer. We're starting to think about the light of Shavuos. And so perhaps the celebration of Lag BaOmer, perhaps the light, as it were, of the bonfires that some use, perhaps this kind of rather exuberant and difficult to understand way of celebrating is really a way of saying that Shavuos, the light of the Torah, the centerpiece of the Jewish experience, is on the way in just a couple of weeks. Wish you a good Shabbos and sei gesund und stark.